You mentioned carpool karaoke, which is one of its most trademark things, if you will. How did that whole idea come about and the execution itself?
Well, that was really Ben and James. The only thing I contribute to carpool karaoke is maybe you hear my laugh every once in a while once they run it for the audience. But even that is tenuous at best. There was in London, they have something called Red Nose Day, which they also have in the US now, but it's a much bigger, more established thing there. One of the characters that James played in the series, he used that character to do sketches on Red Nose Day. And in one of those sketches, he was driving in a car with George Michael, and they start singing George Michael songs in the car. And it wasn't a carpool karaoke in name, but it was a carpool karaoke sort of in gestation. And they used that piece of footage to show Mariah Carey what a carpool karaoke would look like. And they got that name basically once they moved to LA. How you can get around easier is in the carpool lane, but you need somebody to drive with you, and that's the whole setup. And so I think Mariah saw that George Michael clip, or they showed Mariah Carey and her team that clip, and that helped to convince them to do it. And then there was just, there slowly but surely more people did it. The one that really exploded after Mariah was massive. And especially like for a show that young, like I think both Mariah and Roll Call ended up having like close to 10 million views in the first week each. And that is like an unprecedented late night situation, especially for someone who was so new to America. But then they had Justin Bieber do a carpool, and they saved that one, or they scheduled that one, I should say, to air on the night of the David Letterman finale, his series finale. And this is where, like, if it sounds like I know what I'm talking about every once in a while, like I don't always. I talked to Ben and Rob and James. I was like, are you sure you want to air this Bieber thing on the night of the Letterman finale? Like, they're going to be showing all these great classic clips, and then there's so much sentimentality to it, and I'm not sure that necessarily is the audience primed to watch Justin Bieber singing in a car right after that, or should we? Maybe there's something else that we should do. They're like, no, we like it. We want to do it. I was like, all right. And then it's the biggest YouTube video that they've ever had at that point. And I'm like, okay. It's also the highest rated show that they've ever done, I think, or second highest rated they've ever had was the show that aired right after Letterman. And I humbly bowed to their taste. They definitely knew what they were doing. And I was wrong on that one.
Why do you think it exploded? Was it because they appealed to different demographics?
James says this a lot. It's very true. Like the intimacy that happens in a car and the type of conversation that happens and how artists are able to present themselves and sort of expose a softer side, sometimes an honest side, have conversations you never hear them say before. And then you still get to see them do really big, fun songs, sing all their classic hits, sing their new songs. It's just like, it hits every button. And I think for Bieber, especially at that point, like I certainly I had never been exposed to that side of Justin Bieber. And it's not calculated. It's two guys hanging out in a car, two people hanging out, sometimes five people hanging out in a car. But it's just like the longer you're hanging, the more fun everyone's having. And then, ultimately ends up being 12 to 15 minutes on television that's like sometimes iconic and sometimes like borderline historic when it comes to something like Adele and the Paul McCartney ones. Like, I just honestly, like, everybody pinches themselves on some of these pieces that they're able to be witness to it. It feels like just a little piece of magic. And some of it is, these people they're incredible. Their voices are incredible. Their willingness to have fun at their own expense sometimes, or just have fun with James. Like all of that is just fun to see people having fun.
At what point did you feel, because it sounds very much like right from the start, it was seeing so much success. At what point did you feel that this was a show that had made it? Because James said that he was convinced he was going to be sacked within weeks. He didn't even buy any furniture. And it was only until that Stevie Wonder Carpool Karaoke that he felt that he made it.
I felt pretty good about it pretty early on. So we had a really interesting window of time when this show was starting, because I know it was only 5 years ago, or I guess a little over 6 years ago now. But, we premiered during a time where the NCAA basketball tournament was happening. So the big college basketball tournament, CBS shows a lot of these games. There's sort of like, it was, so it's the first bit of exposure was kind of big and happening during a time where there's a lot of eyeballs and not necessarily the people who watch CBS all the time. It's people who come in and watch this thing. So that was a big deal. Then 2 months later, you've got this Letterman finale, which has a massive audience. It's, people want to see how the show ends, and there's a nostalgia element too. And so you get a sort of a second hit of, hey, if you've only checked out our first night or a video here or there, like, this is what we're doing. But then we had the summer where they weren't running repeats of Letterman. At 11:30 at night, they were running repeats of their primetime dramas. So it was shows like CSI Miami, or maybe not CSI Miami, CSI, it was NCIS, it was The Mentalist, but we still had original shows, Corden at 12:30. But we felt like, well, we're no holds barred right now. Like, this is just crazy freedom. We're gonna do some really weird stuff. They didn't hold bits where they would just like pretend to do that they were just the after show for the repeat of The Mentalist that just aired. And so it was like a round table with a black backdrop where they're just goofing on the show that aired before then. Just a bunch of insanity. And then in September, Stephen Colbert debuted. And by then, like, we're a well-oiled machine. We're 6 months in. So the Corden shows got momentum and confidence. So then you're still getting like a third hit of new exposure of people who are maybe have not been tuning in on any regular basis, or it's quite a regular basis. And so then here we are again. And you have these sort of tent poles where in that first year or so, which went all the way up into, we aired an episode after the Super Bowl in, I think it was that first year. Maybe it was even the second year. It was close enough to it, but it was just a really big piece of exposure once again. And they just like, they're writing funny things. His confidence has grown as a host. His just like, it's that 10,000 hours again, where like you just get confident in your skills. And, that goes all the way through. I'd say just like, you just enjoy the stuff that you're making. You might not hit a home run every night, but I think that you know that you've connected often, and then you've done it for a while, and it's like, okay, what else can we do? What else can we do? That's when you start looking for those fun other tent poles. So I would say, like, I've always loved when shows are able to travel, and sometimes that's like a one-off, but my favorite shows have always been like when I was at Conan, with the Conan group, like they went to Toronto for a week, and they went to Chicago for a week, and they went to San Francisco for a week, and like the Leno show went to Vegas. Like the energy that came from there, the audiences, the type of remote driven comedy that we did where they'd go to different places that you'd never get to go, they were all so great. The Corden show went to London, which is going back home, and they've done that 3 times, and like those just have this unbelievable energy that I don't know. You almost have to experience it. I think you can feel it when you're watching it, but being in that room and that church, literally it was a church. It's just like, it's the culmination of the things that you hope you get to do on these shows.
And what was the energy like when James wanted to jump off a plane with Tom Cruise? You mentioned that was really difficult to get through.
So like the first 3 months that we were there, before we'd even started on the show, I was out of the office for some reason. I'm not even sure why. And James left a note on my desk, and it said, "Let me jump out of a plane. It'll be amazing." This is before he even got on the air. And I'm like, you can't jump out of a plane. Like, no one's going to let you do that. Like, the things that could go wrong are just exponential. Please stay on the ground. And, cut to, I guess, 4 years later, Tom Cruise says, "Let's jump out of a plane." It's kind of hard to say no to that. And James still wanted to do it, and they had to vet it through safety. My bosses joked that the only way they let that happen is if I also jumped out of the plane with them. And I was like, I didn't sign up for that. That was never going to happen anyway. But once production got on board, once the higher ups of the studio production facility and all of the right paperwork was signed, then it was just off to the races. And I mean, it is like incredible footage. It's just like a tremendous piece of content. And there might not be a single guest that is more willing to do things than Tom Cruise. I mean, he goes for it.
I've noticed the show is very, very popular on YouTube, and there are so many comments all the time. But when you first started your career, this didn't happen. So at what point did you start seeing that sort of almost direct relationship with the people listening to the show, and you could hear what they were all thinking?
That's a good question. I think about it this way a little bit. For late night in general, if the internet existed in the 80s and in the 90s, everything that we thought was funny about Letterman and Conan, Arsenio, SNL, like they all would have been supernova viral hits. Triumph the Insult Comic Dog would have been a massive, massive hit. But because that didn't happen, like the way that the shows knew about it and what was working and what wasn't was the audience reaction in the studio when they would bring someone like a Triumph back. He's a dog puppet that speaks with a Russian accent. He's like a roast comedian. So he just makes fun of other guests when they come on, or he'll go now, like he'll travel. I say he, like he's a real figure. It's like Robert Smigel is the comedian, writer, actor who voices Triumph and created Triumph. But he'll even go to he'll make fun of politicians in Washington, D.C. with this puppet. And nothing looks weirder than watching Ted Cruz looking at a puppet who is making fun of him, and he's one of hundreds of people who've gotten the brunt of Triumph's insults. Anyway, so that is how that exposure happened that way, sort of organically. People on the streets would say something, or people in the audience would react. And then I happened to be in New York when Saturday Night Live did what ended up being one of the first true YouTube viral videos. And again, I didn't have anything to do with it. I just happened to be there that week and recognized and realized it was a sketch called Lazy Sunday. It was an original rap that Andy Samberg and Chris Parnell did. And it was a rap that sounded like it had a hardcore vibe to it, but it was about the Chronicles of Narnia. And it ended up, that was the thing that really exploded on the internet from the late night space. And so that was the first time where we were like, we got to put things online. That's the way to do things now. But there was a bit of a push and pull with how YouTube was being used from the networks, from broadcast networks. Fallon was the first of the NBC shows. Kimmel might have done it before Fallon, but Fallon was the first of the internet of the NBC shows that was adamant about YouTube and using YouTube in that way and creating a relationship online with viewers and fans. And even they had some push and pull about things like, can we have a Twitter account? Can Jimmy have his own Twitter account? Can he tweet his own things? It's only 5-6 years later, basically, that once we established Corden, we've now all come from me being at Pete Holmes and working on a show that had a relatively small viewership, but a massive online fan base and YouTube viewership comparatively. So I knew the value of it. Rob Crabb, coming from Fallon show, knew it as well. Ben and James, having seen how those Red Nose Day videos that they had made did online, let alone, there's many, many other people who also had similar experiences. We all knew the value, but we were creating something from whole cloth, because that wasn't necessarily how late night was done at CBS at the time. So we created a really strong and robust, small but robust digital footprint with dedicated producers who only worked on the digital aspect of the show, created the voice online, and still to this day, and even probably more now than ever, interacts with that fan base. And yeah, there's a real awareness of what people are talking about online about the show, and hopefully it's mostly good. But I think we found that a lot more recently with the way that the show has been produced in this time period. Once they've gone back into the studio during the pandemic, I should say, we're still in it a little bit.
Would you say that YouTube is the main platform for you to connect with the people? And to what extent does it influence what you do? Because I noticed that even to this day, people keep on saying, kidnap One Direction, kidnap One Direction. And James even referenced it in a segment.
Yeah, I think that it is, the interaction, I think, largely happens with our digital unit, our digital producers who are there. But that's not to say that any of us have a lack of awareness of what's going on. We're all exposed now to people tweeting at us about One Direction. Ben worked with them. That's obviously how a lot of it started, but he directed a lot of the One Direction music videos, and we've had everybody basically on the show. Harry Styles is certainly a very good friend of the show and of Ben's and James. So yeah, there's certainly awareness of fan bases, BTS's fan base especially. We have a great relationship with them and have loved it every time those guys come on the show. Little Mix, pop fan bases, I think, are the most rabid. And we also have a lot of fun working with them when they do something on the show. And so, yeah, I think that the show, I'm sure that they would say their priority is to make a good show first. and they hope that people like it. And they are aware when people do like it and when things go well. But they also have, I think, conviction of their own that like, even if something's a little bit weirder than you might expect from the show, like it might still turn into something. I think that's a little bit of where we're at now also.
So where we're at now is that COVID happened last year. And I wonder when you first heard of it and realized that this would actually impact what we are doing here.
It happened, it happened that week in March. I want to say it was like the week of March 9th for us is when the last tapings that we did with an audience was during that week. We had, speaking of One Direction, Niall Horan was the guest all week long doing music and comedy. We ended up taping 4 shows over 3 days. So we double taped on the last day. Had we not done that, we double taped on a Wednesday. They wouldn't let us have an audience on a Thursday, thankfully, because it was hard to know how fast it was spreading. We were all still kind of getting up to speed on it. I was really nervous about too many people being in a room together at that point. We didn't even know like that Friday whether we would do shows the next week or not, whether it was safe to do that, because the number of people who had been infected seemed like it was concentrated more in New York than it was in Los Angeles. And there were pockets that were white hot and some that had less exposure. But we made, thankfully, the right decision to be cautious. Ben, this was really, once again, the show and the production team, far more than me, who were really adamant about wanting to do a show that looked and felt different and unique than just immediately going back however possible they could do it. They wanted to set it up right and make it look as sharp as they could. We're all like, I don't think any of us had ever been on Zoom before March. And then we were watching shows and making shows through it. But they, figured out how to create a small studio for James in his garage. And he spent basically April, May, and June doing shows there. The thing about late night that also happens time and again, where the real world hits you and it's not a time to make jokes. It's a time to really have thoughtful conversations and speak to what's happening in the country or in the world. And that happened a lot over the last spring and continues to happen. The first thing that they wanted to make though, and was, I think, the impetus for going to the garage, was they did a special called Home Fest, which was speaking about, even though we're all separate and apart right now, we are experiencing something globally. And so they invited Dua Lipa and BTS and Andrea Bocelli and just artists from Billie Eilish all over the world and all these different places who were doing really, really intimate performances and speaking to what was happening in the places that they were. And it was a really powerful hour and something that came together very quickly and had a real sort of late night spirit, but was just, I think, spoke to the moment, and I thought quite a thoughtful way. And then we had to do shows also from there. But I think it's hard to do anything in a vacuum. I think we're all in this place where hopefully, we're just coming out of it. Like I last month was the first month that I had really gotten to spend any significant time out of my house. And it's, it's a sea change to get back out into the world. And, the show moved faster in getting out of the garage and finding a way to get back into the studio. But in order to do that, they had to create essentially a new version of their studio. They're still in Studio 56, but they retrofitted it so that there was enough space for cameras and social distancing. We weren't going to have an audience for any of those shows. So they took some of the audience seating out so that they could have more room for producers if they needed to be in the studio, or grips, or anybody on the production side, and also the camera ops, but still felt closer to what we were doing before the pandemic. Just immense amount of credit to the producers and staff for staying safe and keeping exposures to the absolute bare minimum and being able to continue doing shows without a break, essentially, because everyone really valued their colleagues and working and wanting to continue doing shows. And so they just were very, very smart about it, about this last 9 months really of being in the studio and being careful. And so that has allowed them to continue doing more and more things, which, that includes having guests in the studio now when they can. It's being really comfortable being on Zoom, but still from the studio and having guests Zoom in. They've been able to do some pretty big comedy pieces with talent. Prince Harry, which is this incredible piece of video that they were able to do and safely earlier this year, which again, like I just get to watch it like everybody else. I had nothing to do with that one except just stare at amazement at the like relationships that Ben and Rob and this group have built with someone like Prince Harry to trust them enough to do this really fun, funny, and thoughtful piece. That was great. And same thing with like Megan Thee Stallion did a big Santa Claus piece with us. We've had just a pretty consistent group of people that want to do remotes and want to come back. And the more people that get vaccinated, the more people that want to come into the studio. And, you know, that included me also, like getting a chance to go back into the studio was like just an absolute joy for me.
So you go back into the studio on 4th of May after 14 months working from home. How do you end up in the show itself?
I don't know. Don't know. I basically, so there was one day, and I'm pretty sure this got cut out of a show, where James just asked Rob, like, where's Nick? Why isn't he in here? And I couldn't. I wasn't allowed back. We were still in a work from home situation, but I was always hoping to go back. And over the course of, you know, from March of 2020 through now, we see each other on Zoom, so they know what I look like. I didn't always look like this. I had much shorter hair when this all started. And James mentioned sort of just off the cuff, like it'd be funny if like when he gets here, let's put him by the bar. And oftentimes I texted Rob during the show, but the things that I would text were like, you probably can't talk about this product as much as you are, or you can't say this word 20 times. Like you got to cut that out. But at that point I said to Rob, I just said like, I'll go wherever you want me to go. This wasn't something I ever wanted. I never wanted to be on television. That wasn't something that was of any interest to me, but I recognize the value of all of these behind the scenes people that I've been watching, that I know, but I've been watching on the show, having a blast. Pete, the camera guy, Ian, the writer, Hagar and Guillermo and the band, Susan, who does audio. Like there's this whole group of people who now are characters, and it's a blast to watch. And so if they want another character and they think that I can provide something for them, fine. I'll go up and I'll do whatever you want. But then like the day before I started, they just wanted me to not just be behind the bar, but on this really tall chair. I was like, okay, I guess it'll look funny. It definitely did look funny. And then every day they're like, well, let's just keep raising it. So throughout the week, I wouldn't know what it would look like until I got into the studio. But then I just was on this like huge platform way above the ground, which I'm not even sure was really that safe. And they just kept on putting me up there, and they got a real kick out of it, and I didn't fall. So I guess everything's okay. And then it really took on a very natural life of its own, because I recognize that it's fun to poke fun at the big cheese, as they like to say, even though I'm a little cheese. But they just can ask me all sorts of questions that I often am very truly uncomfortable answering, and sometimes get in trouble for answering. I like being honest, and I don't want to I'm not going to say something that isn't true. I just probably don't need to say as much on the air as I have been. And I definitely wasn't sure what was going to happen after that first week was over. But they just keep having me sitting in with the rest of the gang, to the point where like it's now somehow a natural thing for me to get there and get a mic, put on my clothes, and they sit me in a chair with this like giant real professional light on me. And so I always think the funniest thing is when there's a guest in the studio now and they walk over to James. If they look out into the audience, I think the only thing they can see is me, because I've got this giant light on me, but I got this crazy head of hair, and they don't know, none of these people know me. So I don't know what they're possibly thinking when that's happening, but we're all having fun. So hopefully they are too.
And how fun was it when they were talking about all the things they shouldn't be, like the Gap clothes, the Carnival cruise? I think everyone is still waiting for updates on those.
Yeah, they are. I mean, hopefully sometime soon I can provide it, but some of this is better done off the air than on the air if we're really going to make something happen. I was very, very surprised by everybody wearing athleisure wear one day. They brought me into a meeting like 5 minutes before the show started, which ended up being like a normal meeting where, there's a lot of things we have to talk about the show. And so I'm having this normal meeting, and then I go into the studio, they're ready to start. So I'm not really looking around. So I'm noticing absolutely nothing. So when Ian gets up and he's wearing head to toe athleisure wear, and then James gets up and he's also wearing it. And then I'm looking around and I didn't even notice Reggie's wearing it too. I just thought like, this is just really funny. This is really funny. I have nothing. I got nothing right now. And I just hope that no one gets too mad at me, which I think I've skated along okay so far.
I think it skates on that, that danger line, if you that you've talked about, because then there was this one episode after where they had that talking to with the big cheeses, and you could see everyone was a bit salty.
Yeah. There's a lot of elements of real in the way that these things are playing out on television, where I think day to day, nothing is planned. That whole segment, I think it's palpable. No one's planning any of that. So I don't know what James is going to ask me. I don't know what he's going to want to talk about. Clearly, sometimes I don't even know what he's wearing. And I think we all just do our best to stay in the moment and be a part of it. And I think we go a little bit longer than what ends up airing on TV. And surely I don't think that they would let me or anyone go completely unprotected out there. But I also think like we're smart enough to know that this will air on television, even if I occasionally forget something like reminding people that I'm married because someone
3 times.
But I just didn't expect that someone was going to text one of the writers, Cece, and tell them something really flattering about me. So that just this is not something that I was built for. I like behind the scenes. I like helping to develop the show. It's my own fault because like I said, and you just said it, like I enjoyed the danger elements. Those are the parts that are really fun. So I think I have to just like strap in and hold on tight. Hope that everything goes well, or at least they accept my apology afterwards.
So it sounds promising that you would be a somewhat permanent feature then, because that's what everyone in YouTube is saying.
Well, I don't know. Honestly, like I really have enjoyed the moment and being around everybody and being part of it. And I think that like the enthusiasm that's happening in the studio, in part for me, certainly is like, it's just so much fun to see everybody again in person. Like that is very special. So I don't know what happens once we go back to sort of a more normal routine. I know that Ben and James and Rob, and I think certainly the large portion of the audience, definitely YouTube and me, like we all like how Act 1 plays right now. And so I hope that we are able to continue doing some of this fun, loose plays. Whether I'm in it or not, really doesn't matter. Really is fine. But now, now they know that they can throw to me. I think it's just the thing that's cool is there's so many people that they can talk to. He has so many people that are fun and quirky and silly, and that is pretty rare. That's not something that necessarily happened in any late night show before. So this feels really fun.
Is there anything that we can expect from the show at this point?
I think I don't think so. I think that we all really do enjoy when the crew gets to be part of the show and how James interacts with them. I think that they'll figure out a way to continue doing something. But how it looks and how it's different than what it is now, part of the joy of late night, I think, is sometimes you find it. You find your way there. You can't plan it too much. The thing that works, you do that as much as you can. And, if one day we all get on a cruise together, like all the better.
And speaking of the joy of late night, for those who are listening who would love to do what you're doing, what kind of advice do you have?
I just think entertainment is such a weird space that is unlike other jobs in that it's a little hard to plan for, and it's a little hard to go after something too specific. And part of that is, in order to know what you want to do, I think you have to get exposed to a lot of different things. I've heard a lot of people say sometimes the best internship they had was at a place that they didn't like because they realized that they didn't enjoy that element of the job or the industry. And so they knew not to go there. And sort of that helped them to hone in on what they wanted to do. I think if people like late night, there's a lot of late night adjacent things. There's not that many late night shows. There's certainly more now than there used to be, but there's not that many, but there's a lot of late night adjacent things. And so the more places that are like late night that they can look at, that sometimes is YouTube channels, sometimes it's podcasts, sometimes it is, once the world opens up again, there are sketch comedy performance places like Second City and the Groundlings and UCB. And even there's a place called Boom Chicago in Amsterdam that a lot of really top level comedians started at. And you kind of have to find your people in your place. And a lot of that is just taking that first step, which is being adventurous enough to try it. And I think the regret you have is when you want it and you don't try it. But if you have the ability and the sort of willingness to recognize, like, you might not get that job right away, but if you stick around, you will find your friend base. You might have a job that is a day job that allows you to try something a little more creative in your off hours, and you have enough energy that you get to do both those things. I think that's the way that you start. And then the more, again, that you are exposed to different elements of the industry, the more you think like, oh, there's a lot of things that I could do and that I like and I want to do. And maybe it's late night, maybe it's something else. Maybe I really like radio. Maybe I love podcasts. And, having a little bit of that sort of entrepreneurial sense also is that kind of helps you to do that. Because oftentimes, in order to, well, again, pre-pandemic, you had to move to one of these big cities in order to get to work in this industry. And just having the confidence to do that, like, that's a big step. And you shouldn't dismiss that also as a thing. But, give yourself some time and don't expect it right away. It's really hard for that to happen for anyone too soon. And when you see articles, I mean, I used to, like, when I was 25, I saw like Seth MacFarlane has a deal with Fox to make, Family Guy and do an Empire. And I'm like, he's only 25 and he got that done? That's crazy. And I was like, well, yeah, it's crazy. And the reason they write so much about it is it's so rare for someone that young to have that opportunity. So you got to put in your time a little bit in order to sort of get to the places that you want.
And since you're becoming such a fixture on the show, what kind of common misconception would you like to clear that people might have of you?
I don't know I'm actually not sure what the common misconceptions of me might be. I think,
or just something that you would wish people knew about you. All
right. I guess if there's people that are watching the show and they see me and think that I look miserable, I am not miserable. I probably never loved working at a place more than I love working at CBS with the Late Late Show and that group. They're like some of my greatest colleagues that I've gotten a chance to work with. And a lot of this is in jest and fun, and they enjoy watching me squirm, but in the most loving way, like you would with your family. And so I think that's probably the best takeaway, that like, as much fun as it looks, it really is that fun. Like, this is a really good group that I think values themselves, values each other even more now than they did before, because of how hard we've had to work to stay together this way.
Well, thank you so much, Nick, for so much time you've spent here. Yeah. I normally like to wrap up all of my interviews with these questions. So the first one is this: do you feel like you have found your why?
Yes, but I will just say, I think there's more than one why. And so I'd hate to think that I'm done finding it.
And what kind of legacy would you like to leave behind?
The thing that I think is my biggest legacy is probably camp once again, and like helping younger kids get a chance to experience and expose themselves to comedy and performance, and creating something that they thought of on their own that they think is funny, and helping them sort of execute that. And I think that teaching is the best legacy you could possibly leave.
And what do you think are the most important qualities of a successful person?
I think the most successful people that I admire the most are great listeners. They are hard workers. They have an incredible level of commitment. And I guess in addition to just listening to others, they are willing to seek help when they need it, say that they don't know when they really don't know an answer, and take advice, or even at the very least listen to advice and acknowledge other people around them. I do think that like those are the leaders that you want to follow for forever.
I think you tend to write hundreds of cards as well to everybody, right?
I do. I love writing letters. I think it's an art form that I just hope doesn't get lost. It's something that's tangible. I think is still really nice to have.
And where can people go to connect with you, find out what you're doing in the Late Late Show as well?
I mean, if I'm gonna promote anything, it's just that you should watch the Late Late Show as often as you can. however you do it, whether it's on Paramount Plus as a streaming network, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on CBS proper, and the Late Late Show on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram, which is all basically at Late Late Show. They're really fun. And if you really want to talk to me online, I am at Bernstein Nick, and occasionally I tweet.
They don't need to look for your LinkedIn.
You can always find me there. The great email that I got from you, which I really appreciated, was, well, you said if you're saying yes to everything, not a bad way to go every once in a while.